Shana Tova. In this sacred season, in this sacred space, as we connect to tradition, to community, and the highest calling of our being, let my first words to you be those of blessing, that you, your loved ones, the people in the state of Israel, and all of humanity know a year of health and of peace. Please join me in the Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'hiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who's kept us in life and sustained us and enabled us to reach this time. This time, our time, is a time of testing. Comforting as it is to return to synagogue on the holidays, as a Jewish people, the year gone by has been as difficult as any in our lives. A tortured catalog of tests and trials faced by our people, countless in quantity, increasing in severity, and never ending in complexity. It's a lot, it's not easy, it's not getting better, and the most difficult tests still seem to lay ahead. It's not as if this time last year everything was so simple. The state of Israel and the Jewish people were divided on the question of judicial reform, a nation that once brought us together, rife with internal division in Israel and across global Jewry. And then, perhaps sensing our internal weakness, on October 7th, our external enemies attacked. Some 1,200 murdered in cold blood. Men, women, children, babies. Unspeakable physical and sexual violations. Crimes against Israel, against Jews, and against humanity. Over 250 hostages taken captive that day. The fate of some 100 remains in the balance. An ongoing trauma for us all. Since the horrors of October 7th, the cascade of tests and trials has flowed uninterrupted. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis evacuated from the line of fire in the south, in the north, entire communities displaced to this day. A nation mobilized for war, the lives of soldiers and their families disrupted, a nation interrupted. Thousands of IDF soldiers wounded and killed in a courageous defense of the Jewish state in the face of an enemy whose stated goal, and let me mince no words, is Israel's total destruction. Hours, mere hours, is all it took for the tide to turn across the globe. Israel was still counting its dead, had yet to mobilize, and was already being named the aggressor. Online, on campus, in the world court, on the streets, a pernicious and porous blurring of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, a world that would place blame for the horrific loss of Palestinian and now Lebanese lives solely on Israel's soldiers, on the Jewish people's soldiers, expending no thought to Hamas and Hezbollah's cynical, sinister, and sadistic tactics, resulting in maximum pain upon innocents. War is horrific. Whatever one's politics may be, to not be heartbroken at the loss of Palestinian life is to be inhuman. It is the North Star of our faith and of this community, the equal and infinite dignity of every human being created in the divine image. Any bloodshed, a diminishment of God's presence on earth. How to champion Israel's right to self-defense, how to counter anti-Semitism, and express empathy for Palestinian suffering. It's a test we all feel, a test dividing our people, a test dividing the generations, a test dividing our very persons. A teeming cauldron of violence, as spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, has spilled into Israel from the north, from Lebanon. Israel wholly justified in defending the lives of its northern border and the tens of thousands of evacuees. And yet, even as Israel mobilizes on the next front, even as missiles fall, the fault lines have erupted within Israel, protests for and against the hostage deal, for and against the Israeli government in Israel and in the diaspora. Those who believe that wartime expression of dissent to be the highest form of betrayal, and those who believe that the failure to do so is a failure of conscience. And now, the arrival of a contentious election season only serving to exacerbate the internal divisions within American Jewry. Trial after trial, test after test, and the toughest still yet ahead. We may be dressed in our holiday finest, but on the inside we are ragged and threadbare. No doubt, I imagine, every one of us can identify with Tevye's cry to God in Fiddler on the Roof, I know, we are your chosen people, but once in a while, God, can't you choose someone else? As long as Jews have been Jews, we have been a people tested. The rabbis of old enumerate 10 trials faced by our founding father and mother, Abraham and Sarah. Some, like Abraham's self-circumcision or Sarah's infertility, are biological. Some, like Abraham's argument before God in the face of the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, are theological. Many, like Abraham's wars with neighboring tribes and his kin being taken captive, or the seizure and sexual compromise of Sarah by a foreign power, cuts too close to home this year. Some we read about today on Rosh Hashanah, the struggle between Isaac and Ishmael, the eponymous ancestors to the Jewish and Arab people over their father's physical and spiritual estate. We identify with Sarah's defense of hearth and home, even as we empathize with Hagar and Ishmael's right and search for a home of their own. On the second day, tomorrow of Rosh Hashanah, we read what is often considered the greatest trial, the binding of Isaac. In fulfillment of God's covenantal commandment, Abraham is told, Kach et bincha, take your son, your only son, the one you love, and bind him upon the altar. A terrible choice, his own flesh and blood or his covenantal obligations to the nation. A test of ultimate consequence without a clear or a clean answer. An ancient story that speaks to us with urgency today. From our founding biblical family, we are a people tested. Of the many, many ways to tell the story of the Jewish people, one is through the prism of trials extended and trials transcended. A few years ago, I visited the Cairo Museum and set eyes on what is known as the Merneptah stele, a black obelisk describing the conquests of an ancient pharaoh. The hieroglyphic inscription is dated to 1207 BCE, and it contains the earliest mention of Israel, reading, Israel is laid waste, his seed is no more. In the Louvre, there's another stele, this one dated to 880 BCE, attributed to King Mesha of Moab, similarly reflecting on Israel having perished forever. It would seem, to repurpose Twain, that reports of our demise have been greatly exaggerated. Merneptah, Moab, the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans in the dustbin of history. The Jewish people, small in number, are still very much present. We have been tested, and we are still here. The historian Shimon Ravidovich once penned a famous essay on our people's enduring nature. It was entitled, Israel, the Ever-Dying People. Be it due to persecution, dispersion, or the forces of assimilation, every age and stage of Jewish existence has believed itself to be the last one, until, of course, the next generation arrives utterly convinced of the same. The question is why, or perhaps more precisely, How? From the trials of Abraham to our wilderness wandering, from Daniel in the lion's den to the Babylonian exile, what is the thread that has connected one generation to the next and sustained our people in our hour of darkness? In a word, hope. In his book on the subject, David Arno explains hope to be the embrace of the possibility of a particular, deeply defined future. It is hope that fuels our actions to help bring it about. When God plucked Abraham and Sarah from obscurity to leave their native land and fulfill a covenantal promise to journey to a land sight unseen, he needed hope. When God tells the childless and aging first couple that they will bear a son, they laugh. Thus the name Yitzchak, meaning laughter in the future tense, the hopeful joy that the son would yet come. Even when Abraham climbs the mountain hand in hand with his son, Abraham held out hope that this terrible test would find resolution. It wasn't that Abraham was always successful. He wasn't. His pleading to God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah fell short. But in the aggregate, he was. And most importantly, even when he wasn't, he picked himself up to fight another day. The first Jew, the first prophet of hope. When Jacob fled his brother Esau with nothing to his name other than the stone upon which to lay his head to sleep, it was hope that enabled him to reach the dawn of a new day. When Joseph languished in the dungeons in Egypt, it was hope that allowed him to persevere. When Pharaoh decreed that to kill the newborn Israelite children, it was the Hebrew midwives who demonstrated the requisite hope to follow their conscience, exercise civil disobedience, and bring life into this world. When Moses stood at the burning bush wondering if he was up to the task, he sought assurance by asking for God's name, to which God famously replied, Eheyeh asher eheyeh, I will be that which I will be. In other words, the mark of the divine, be it in the heavens or the human soul, is the belief that who we are today is not and need not be who we are and where we are tomorrow. From that first step into the sea with Pharaoh's chariots in hot pursuit, to the Hasmoneans lighting that single cruse of Hanukkah oil despite only having enough but for one day, it was hope, the master thread that kept our narrative together from darkness to light, from one generation to the next. Hope is at the core of Israel, the people and the state. In 1870, the founders of then Palestine's first agricultural school called themselves Mikveh Israel, the hope of Israel. 7 years later, the first agricultural settlement was named Petach Tikva, the opening of hope. Herzl's vision of political Zionism, Eliezer ben Yehuda's revival of the Hebrew language, Israel's anthem Hatikva, all statements of hope, a rejection of the status quo, declarations of self-empowerment, agency, collective responsibility, and possibility, a people of possibilitarians. Afal pichen, in spite of it all, and against our better judgment, we are, as described by the prophet Zechariah, prisoners of hope. We are the ones who climb the mountaintops, whether or not we reach the promised land, a hope that depends neither on the kindness of others nor on divine intervention, a hope that announces the intention of the Jewish people to take agency and secure the destiny of the Jewish people. That is what Zionism is, the hopeful right to Jewish self-determination in our historic homeland. And, stripped down to its essence, hope is what today Rosh Hashanah is all about. The High Holiday Prayer Book calls today Hayom Harat Olam, the day that the world was created, but it's more than that. Today is a day that we roll out not just a blueprint of creation, but of our imagination. And yeah, this year we do so from a place of darkness. My thoughts turn to Rachel Goldberg Poland, who prior to the murder of her son Hirsch, stood before a global audience sharing that since October 7th, she felt like she lived in another world. We felt her anguish then, all the more so now, mourning as we do Rosh and the other hostages. We see the shattered state of the world, and we imagine the sort of world in which we seek to live. The Hebrew word for hope, tikvah, is a word sharing the root kav, meaning line, as in the shortest distance between 2 points. We may presently exist in a place of darkness, doubt, and despair, but hope is the line that we cast forward, the rope by which we pull ourselves towards the goal of actualizing an as yet unrealized future. This is the hope, the tikvah, that has impelled our people from the earliest beginnings, through every dark hour, through every moment, through the founding of Israel, of which we are in such desperate need of right now. Today, literally today, threatened as the state of Israel is by its neighbors, threatened as the people of Israel are by our haters, we too must hope. Eyes wide open to the trials before us, we have to imagine a future reality, we have to give voice to that reality, and most of all, we have to work to make that reality happen. As have those who came before us, today we face our trials with hope. First and most urgent is a trial of survival. We hope not just for survival, but to win. To win because we have no other choice but to win. Israel need make no apology for defending its citizens or waging war against its enemies. The hate-filled ideology presently driving Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and other proxies make no allowance for any Jewish presence in the Middle East. I'm reminded of Golda Meir's comment, "You cannot negotiate peace with someone who seeks to kill you." As long as the hostages remain captive, as long as Israel's citizens stand in harm's way, as long as Jewish lives are at risk around the world, we must stand firm in our defense of our people's interests and the justness of our cause. It may not be popular, but that fact never and presently does not deter us. As the Midrash explains, Abraham was called Ha'ivri, from the Hebrew root meaning ever, meaning to cross over, because he was willing to stand on one side while the rest of the world stood on the other. As Churchill said, in the face of peril, so too us today, to ride out the storm of war and outlive the menace of tyranny, to support the brave soldiers of the IDF, to advocate on behalf of Israel's right to self-defense and self-determination, to bring the hostages home, to call out the scourge of anti-Semitism from any and every quarter, and to secure the well-being of Jews worldwide. We must fight, we must support those who fight the good fight, and we must win. Hope must fuel our drive to victory. And second, hope must serve to remind us of that which it is we are fighting for. Hope is about imagining an alternative, in this case, an alternative to fighting. In other words, a secure Jewish and democratic state of Israel living at peace with its neighbors. In the short term, this means Israel needs to prosecute this war as if there is no tomorrow. It also means that Israel must prosecute this war with an eye to tomorrow. The coming generation of Israelis need hope. The coming generation of Palestinians need hope. Where there is no vision, teaches the book of Proverbs, the people will perish. We need to imagine, articulate, and seed a hopeful vision for the future, lest the victory on the battlefield be rendered hollow by failing to affirm the very thing for which we are fighting. And make no mistake, this too is a test. Of Abraham's 10 trials, Different rabbis, Rashi, Rambam, what have you, enumerate them all slightly differently. All but one commentator identifies the 10th and greatest trial to be the binding of Isaac. Only one, the 13th century Spanish commentator Rabbeinu Yonah, holds otherwise. For him, Abraham's 10th, final, and most difficult trial came after the binding of Isaac, when Abraham's wife Sarah had died and Abraham had to negotiate a burial plot for her with the inhabitants of the land. Negotiate? Haggle? Compromise? Coexist? Really, Abraham thought? I thought that the land was promised to me, to do with as I pleased. No, teaches Rabbeinu Yonah. This too was a test, the hardest one, to square the circle of the Jewish claim to the land with the counterclaims of others, to figure out a way to coexist. This is the test that Abraham faced and the test that Israel still faces, both within Israel and our own community. The Jewish people do not lack for external enemies, but it's the enemies that we make from within that will be our undoing. I know what I stand for, and I know what this community stands for: a secure, Jewish, and democratic state of Israel. I suspect most of us, if not all of us, share that hope. I also suspect that there are as many opinions as to how to arrive at that outcome as there are people in this room, which is why I believe more important than what we say is how we say it. To have a community dialogue that is robust but without rancor, that is passionate but not personal, where we can peel off the reductive and destructive labels of the hour and engage in each other's ideas and be willing to have our own ideas challenged. If our starting point is our shared hopeful vision of a secure Jewish and democratic state, rather than convulsing over the views of others that we just can't conscience, maybe, just maybe, we can pass this test together, keep our people together, and the well-being of global Jewry together, and nudge Israel constructively forward. Third, finally, and most importantly, while most believe the final and greatest test to have been the binding of Isaac, and one rabbi believes it was a challenge of coexistence, I believe that the final test lies elsewhere. Estranged from his son, in mourning of his wife Sarah, Abraham goes on to do something as daring and as hopeful as it is instructive for us today. Like Noah sending out a dove of hope following the flood in that darkest of hour, Abraham sends off his servant in search of a wife for his son Isaac. After all he had been through, after all the trials, Abraham understood that it would be all for naught if the Jewish story ended with him. In other words, Abraham took active steps so there would be Jewish continuity, Jewish grandchildren, and a Jewish future. It's actually what Abraham, Av, meaning ancestor, Racham, meaning many, ancestor to many, means. Would Abraham create a Jewish future? This, I believe, was his greatest test. And we know, because we, his descendants, are all here today, that he passed it with flying colors. And here, I put you to the test. Fight the fight of our people, of course. Keep the Jewish people together, no question. But the ultimate test of each of you and all of us will come by way of how you, in your own deeds, commit to the Jewish future. If you, like Abraham, can make a shidduch, connect two young people with an eye to creating a Jewish home, God bless, do so. If you're positioned to secure and support institutions of Jewish life and living, then the need has never been greater. By all means and with all your means, please do so. But as with all things, the most important thing is your personal example, what you do by way of your own choices, your own deeds, filling your own life with positive and proud expressions of Jewish life and living for yourself and for the generation to come. I refuse to let the sum total of my Judaism or that of my synagogue to be a defense against the anti-Semites, or whether I agree or disagree with the last decision of this or that Israeli government. In our synagogue, at your Shabbat table, in the community, in your personal observances, if you want the next generation to live a proud, joyous, engaged, and literate Judaism, then start with yourself. Pass that test, pass that trial, and from there, we're going to have the strength to pass all of the others. Throughout the year, but especially at this time of year, my thoughts turn to a famous passage in the Talmud that previews the list of questions each one of us will be asked when we reach heaven. Did you conduct your business with integrity? Did you set aside time for Torah study? Did you engage in the pursuit of wisdom? One question is a little different, and perhaps as important as all the others combined. Sipita lishua. Did you hope for the future? In other words, did you imagine, anticipate, and work to operationalize a hopeful vision by which the Jewish people can dwell in strength, solidarity, vitality, and peace? We are not at the gates of heaven, but we are at the gates of the new year. It's a question that sits before each one of us today. Trial after trial, test after test. This year, I identify with Abraham trudging up that mountain. We all do. This year has bruised us all. We have been laid low. I have been bent to my limit, but I will not break. Like my ancestor Abraham, I have hope. Afal pichen, in spite of it all, I have hope. I will face the next trial. I will hope for a brighter future. I will take agency for my role towards realizing that future, and I will work tirelessly to make it happen. Will I succeed? Will any of us? Will there be another test after this one? I don't know. None of us do. But what we can know, what we can do, what we can hope for is that in the days to come, we will be able to look back at this moment knowing that we did everything in our power to pass this time of testing and secure the future of our people. Shana Tova. Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.